A very good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Friday Drinks, and it's great to be back. This is our second show after a whirlwind tour in the UK, and one of our sponsors actually on our trip to the UK was actually Omari, and they've been very kind to us. Maybe producer, you can start by just telling us your experience with the Omari card. This was my first experience outside the country with an Omari card, and I must say, I had a great time just swiping and buying stuff with Omari. What was your experience?
I don't know if I should share the first thing we did when we got to Hertfordshire. The three of us went to some grocery shop, and we just wanted to check if the cards were working. And
No, we knew the card was working at the airport.
yes,
Because I bought some coffee.
yeah, at the airport, right? But you guys were misbehaving because we never meant you were not supposed to have used the cards at the airport.
No.
Anyway, that's besides the point. But look, we just want to thank them for that, generous gift. And to me, it was really, I managed to do one of the things that had been on my bucket list, courtesy of Omari. So I'll always be eternally grateful. It's something that I will not forget because it was, for me, more like a once in a lifetime. I may do it maybe 10, 20, 100 times more, but the first cut is always the deepest.
The deepest. Yeah, you never forget the first time.
You never.
Yeah,
So,
you watched the Chelsea game. Yeah, and you actually got quite a nice seat. You're
I
not
did.
far from the pitch.
I did. I was just like on second row. I was on second row, so just one row was ahead of me and very close to the pitch side. And look, the experience was great.
How come you support Chelsea? What happened?
What happened from where? I think I could say maybe that's probably the first time when Chelsea came, probably or became popular at the turn of the millennium. That's around 2005. I guess that's where I started really following football. Before then,
Oh, with Zola and Viali and
Mourinho's and what. And
that was
and
before Mourinho's time.
Yeah.
That was,
So I was no the card was working in a very very fantastic way. So many stuff that I tried along the way to the stadium and back, and I was just using my card and I didn't have any issues. Not that there were any doubts, but look, it's always good to get the facts. You can't just rely on
on what they actually say.
assurances from the promoters. So the Omar card actually works. Subsequent to that, I then had to reload my own cash onto the card, and it looks like for now it's my card of choice.
Okay. And Rufaro, did you do any swiping, and what was your experience with the Omari card?
Oh, I had a great experience. I mean, I was the first out the blocks, by the way.
Of
And
course.
I swiped at the airport.
course.
I got some, we got there in the morning and we got some coffee. I went on a couple of runs and, I stopped at halfway at some coffee shops or garages to get some water and hydration. And, it worked like a charm. It was, very reliable. Tap and just goes through. It was fantastic. And, the app is also quite modern and
User-friendly, yeah?
User-friendly. You can check your balance, get people to reload for you. It just works. It's just, So yeah, I'm delighted to have them as a sponsor. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I think it's always a blessing to actually have a product that you actually use and you're happy to use the product. So them partnering with us on the show, I think it speaks volumes, and I don't mind gashing about them because it actually does work, which says a lot. Because I think in Zimbabwe a lot of the cards we always have difficulties.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it was
Omari,
fantastic.
thank you very much. And to our audience, please get yourself a Visa Omari card and start using it. The app is just really, one of the
Intuitive.
best that
It's
I've actually
it's very easy.
Yeah,
seen.
You don't have to
Very-
be a techie to figure out how to
Your way around
navigate.
it.
Yeah, it just works. It's
Unless you are.
just, yeah.
What are you guys saying about me?
I had to show you a thing or two.
Of course. Look,
Zia tends to struggle with these things.
yeah, look,
Yeah.
the good thing is, even if one is not comfortable with the app, you can always use the USSD.
What's that?
So we're using the SMS service to
Okay.
access,
The facilities.
facility.
Can you do that actually when you're outside of the country? Can you use?
Yeah, if you're roaming,
USSD?
like some of us are always roaming. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're roaming, then you can do that. Which is the beauty of the Omari product, because the people supposedly like me, that might take a bit of time to learn how to use an app, but that does not stop you from using it, using the normal SMS platform.
Okay. No, great.
But guys,
Yeah, and River, what are you drinking today?
Oh,
Today
yeah,
you have the pleasure of actually having an alcoholic beverage.
Yes. Back to default settings, as it were. I've got a new supplier. I discovered this wonderful lounge in Harare that retails whiskey and wine, and it's got a nice lounge-like vibe where you can just hang out and chill. So they've got a selection that's different from my normal supplier. So I'm quite chuffed to have discovered them. Apparently they've been around for a few years, but I didn't know about them.
Well,
I'm not gonna mention them.
until they sponsor the show.
I'm not going to mention them,
We-
of course, but
we're not supposed to-
I'm not going to mention who they are. But yeah, they've got this cheekily named Irish whiskey called Writer's Tears. It's triple distilled, non-chill filtered, matured in sherry oak.
Why is it longer than the normal?
Well, it's just the design of the bottle. I guess it's a very competitive space. They're trying to stand out, and so they've.
So
got,
what is it? Taller, the taller the better.
No. It's just these whiskey bottles come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and they've gone for this particular shape and design. But the whiskey itself is actually quite smooth and sweet to my liking. So I'm looking forward to sharing a dram with one of my non-teetotaling friends.
Okay, now, and we actually do have a gift. This is somebody who's a fan of the show, and this is Laser Studio. And they've got all sorts of gifts. I think they do the
Leather products.
not the leather product, but
the laser engraving.
engraving. And they've got something really interesting. I don't know if the camera can zoom into that, but that's great. And I think they got the logo quite right. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it looks beautiful.
Looks beautiful,
Yeah,
eh?
and I was just saying before they said, look, it's always good. We are always for promoting businesses and entrepreneurs. So look, they've shown us some love. It's just also that important that we also do the same. So Laser Studio.
JT Laser Studio. Yeah. Shout out to JT Laser Studio.
And guess what? They actually have an Omari key holder. Imagine that.
Yeah. Very
Great. Very innovative.
absolutely.
Well done,
JT
J&T Laser Studio. And what are we drinking? We're drinking Orange Crush and tonic water. That's what I'm having. And you?
I'm drinking some water. Just
going back to boring.
Yeah. Just some water. Yeah.
Are you detoxing?
From what? I don't take any toxins in my body.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, of course, I'm positive. That's the word that you use for referral.
Does he ever detox?
No,
In January.
that would be taking away his life.
Every January I detox,
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah,
Okay.
so-
No, fantastic. Maybe to just kick off the show, let's actually talk about G20. What's actually happening at the G20, which is actually being held the first time. It's actually being held in Africa. Maybe, Rufaro, you can just start by just explaining what G20 is and what significance it has in the world, if any.
Yeah, so I think it's just an expansion of what is actually the more coherent and functional grouping, which is G7, which is
Are you saying G20 is not coherent?
no, it's a talk show, in my opinion. Look, I could be wrong, and feel free to push back. But so the G7 is basically the world's biggest democratic economies. So
Is it about democracy or it's really about?
so it's about it's so because China is not in the G7, it's the world's second largest economy. So it's not just about economics. It's about
Western-
Western
big-
values, the big Western
countries,
economies. So they've got a lot in common in terms of their the way their countries are structured economically and politically. And it's a forum for them to get together and figure out how to cooperate and drive their agenda. So I think at some point the case was made that it was exclusive and elitist, and it needed to be broadened to take into account other major players on the global stage.
But
So-
they
so-
do. The G7 actually does invite people, right?
Yeah.
On invitation.
Yes,
So
but
you do have,
but the core is basically just the seven, major Western economies, and so whereas G20 officially embraces the other major economies that are not necessarily Western. So China's in G20, India's in G20, South Africa, which is relative to everybody else in G20, tiny, is in G20 and is actually hosting. But I think it's as some of these gatherings become politically correct and fashionable, they lose some of their their core, which is why I think it's a talk show, because I don't when you look at all the pronouncements coming out of G20 meetings, none of them change the world in any meaningful way.
well, we had the climate change. I mean, whether or not we believe in it, I think that came out of G7 and G20 deliberations, where they had a declaration where they said, you know what, we are going to tackle the climate issue head on. And then we started seeing COP. And I think it was on the back.
Yeah, and then
of-
COP is another
No,
hilarious.
whether,
talk show.
whether or not we agree with it, but the fact
yeah.
of the matter is, these declarations do actually lead to something. And then
Sometimes,
you have
yeah.
also
Look, so yeah, I'll concede the point. I think you raise a valid case where, from time to time, they do actually come up with initiatives that then permeate the corporate world and are adopted across the world. But for the most part, it's a talk show. They have photo ops, and they have these speeches, and I think this time around, although it's in South Africa, the Americans aren't actually there. And you can argue, that they are the natural leaders of G7, G20. So can you really have a meaningful event and discuss serious issues without them?
The-
Oh, they decided to. They eventually went. Okay, so my bad.
Yeah, they wrote a letter to say, can we come?
Okay, fantastic. So I take that back.
well, I think it's not that they're coming, but they've got the deputy ambassador, right?
Yeah.
Sharon, you can fact check.
Yes.
What's the actual position? Just fact check that. But
yeah.
While we do that, let's actually hear from Zia. It's a talk show, but for whatever reason, the South African one has caused a bit of a turmoil and hoo-ha, where you have the American president making it very emphatic that he's not going to be there, and none of the Americans. Well, initially they had said that there was J.D. Vance was so the vice president of America was the one who was going to attend, and not Trump himself. And then afterwards, they then decided to rescind that, and J.D. Vance was not going to attend. And then I think afterwards, now they just said, because there's a takeover that's going to happen. So because of that, they have the deputy ambassador in the U.S. Embassy in South Africa who's going to attend, but purely from handover, takeover, because next year they're going to hold it. But more importantly, Xi is also not there. We know why Putin is not there, because Putin cannot be on South African soil. He'll be arrested. But so if you don't have Russia, you don't have China, you don't have the USA, but you have Germany, you have France, and to be fair, UK, and a lot of those, I think, except the German prime minister, France and UK, they're going through some of the a lot more turmoil right now. They've got a lot more domestic issues to deal with, and then this is happening on African soil. Just give us your perspective. Is this important, or is it just something that we just gloss over and we move on with our lives?
Well, it's important if you have world leaders coming to your shows. It's not every time that you get all those big hitters in one room in Africa. I think it's symbolic in a way that do you know how many times African leaders have to go to the US, to Europe for some conference? Almost every big European country has got something like this Africa Summit. So the whole continent is used to being summoned to some of these countries, whether it's a France Africa Summit or it could be a German Africa Summit.
Oh, there's even a South Korea Africa Summit,
exactly.
China Africa Summit, all these.
So they're just used to, hey, come here, and they are always going, look, I think it's really part of that whole diplomacy thing, how it works. It's really about the interaction, about the talking. So, you actually gauge the extent of your, if someone's happy and willing to interact with you, or even to just have a conversation with you at that stage, that's a sign of acceptance, that they've accepted you somehow. And maybe the more time that they give you, the more that signals that maybe they take you more seriously. So having them in South Africa, I think it's a big win for South Africa, and it's certainly something that us as Africans can celebrate because we are always going there. And whenever there's someone else, it could have been better if we had all these top leaders that you have already mentioned, whether it's China, President Trump, and also President Putin. Because it's a conversation. They are still important in the geopolitics and how they interact with Africa at the end of the day. And for that moment, the attention will be on South Africa. And the fact that we, also just to tell you that it's not just talk shop. If it was, maybe this diplomatic sort of tiff between US and SA could not have resulted in the American president not attending if it was just talk shop, but there's some significance. He's probably sending some message.
He's definitely sending a message.
Yes.
You can be a talk show, but I can still do it.
So they say, you know what? If I were to come there, I was gonna add something to the talk show. I'm not coming. So it's significant to that extent.
I saw something quite interesting this week ahead of the G20. So Bloomberg had a conference there, a business conference.
Yeah, B20.
And they had, one of South Africa's preeminent business leaders there. They had an interview with Oppenheimer, and he was disparaging the UK, about how difficult it is doing business there, because when Anglo moved its primary listing from South Africa, they went to the UK, and they were saying, it's so difficult there because of the regulations and taxes that you wouldn't touch that place with a barge pole, and I found that quite remarkable that, the Europeans have put themselves in such a position.
Well, that's an important remark there. So you are agreeing with Zia that actually it's not about the show itself, it's not about G20 and maybe the declaration, but it's everything that happens around.
Yeah, it's the conversations and some of the signals that you get from important leaders like Oppenheimer.
There are lots of people. B20, it happens before G20, and there are lots of people who are in the in a room that ordinarily these people would.
You wouldn't get them in one place.
So there's a lot that happens, and also when you have these global leaders. I mean, if you look at the travel itinerary, it's very difficult to get them in a room. And when you get them in a room, that's when they discuss actually, the more important matters of the world. It's not
Absolutely.
going to be out there in the media, but certainly if for example, which I think is a missed opportunity from South Africa. I mean, I've got my own issues with South Africa, but I think the missed opportunity for South Africa, especially when they say that they're the peace-loving nation, in quotes, but it would have been a perfect environment to have Xi and Trump in the same room,
Absolutely.
where they could have a conversation, or whether it's Putin and Trump, or whether it's Putin and Zelensky. Exactly. That becomes, because it's like, okay, we are attending this show, but it's
On the
not all the
sidelines.
time. On the sidelines, you have these interesting conversations that happen, and not just at global diplomatic level, but even at business perspective, because that's where business actually happens. So it's not necessarily what we see in our glossy pages and in our tabloids and the news that will actually make the news. So, for example, G20, the thing that's making the news is Trump throwing a tantrum, but there's a whole lot more around it.
Yeah, and
which unfortunately
it's a
South
huge
Africa has not taken advantage of. That's where I'm coming. That I don't think that South Africa has done enough or did enough to actually take advantage of this unique position where they were actually hosting G20 and for the rest of Africa, because for whatever reason they decided to meddle in other people's affairs. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I tend to agree with your perspective. I think it's a huge missed opportunity, especially given that this particular U.S. administration is not sanctimonious, in terms of its foreign, its attitude towards foreign
Unless
policy.
it's Israel and Iran.
Like just in the last couple of days, literally, the Trump administration hosted, the Saudi crown prince, who, was not viewed in very high esteem.
That's an interesting one. Can we just take a break?
Yeah,
and
sure.
then we pick it up from there.
Absolutely.
So that's a very interesting one about Saudi and what it actually says about, global diplomacy and what's happening in the global economy, because I think that's a very important one. So to everyone at home, please help us. Let's take a break and let's hear from Omari. Okay, thank you very much for coming back to the second segment, and thank you very much, Omari. I think that I'm happy with the partnership and even the way we're dressed. I quite like this.
Yeah.
I find myself, dressing up and picking up this khaki, and it's lovely. Thank you very much, Omari. Rufaro, you had picked on something that was very interesting, because we are talking about global diplomacy and how it actually happens, and there's an important thing that actually happened in the Oval Office, where you had the Saudi and especially the dinner, and you had all sorts of people,
The tech bros.
At the dinner, the Saudi dinner, and
State
which
dinner, with the Saudi crown prince.
It's a big statement. Maybe you wanted to take it apart, contrast that with what's actually happening with South Africa and hosting of G20.
Yeah, so I think it's just important to point out that the Saudis were accused several years ago of the murder of a U.S. Resident and journalist for the Washington Post, and they kind of fell out of favor, and famously President Biden visited Saudi Arabia, and he wouldn't embrace the crown prince, there was that fist bump, to kind of show some distance, and so there's that backstory or context, right? And then you have the current administration fully embrace the Saudis. Trump actually visited Saudi Arabia earlier this year, and then he's now extended not just an invite to the crown prince to the White House. He hosted him for a state dinner with all the tech
Pomp and fanfare, yeah.
the pomp and fanfare of America's Fortune 500 CEOs. And following the dinner, there's a U.S. Saudi business summit where all these where the CEOs of the biggest companies in the world are in attendance, and they're having conversations about making investments in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia.
They've promised $1 trillion,
$1 trillion
investment in
dollars,
America. Why should we take Saudi seriously, and why is not South Africa picking up on what the Saudis?
Yeah, so I think look, the current U.S. administration is very business friendly, very into doing these kind of deals and transactions where they attract investment and they invest in countries that they're partners with. So I think that's why when I apply my mind to what's happening with this G20 summit in South Africa, it's a massive missed opportunity because Trump will travel with
Ranga,
all these business leaders.
Maybe Ranga can defend the South Africans. What's your take? I mean, this diplomatic tiff, we know it's not true that there's genocide happening of the Afrikaner race in South Africa. We know that's actually not true. And it would be easy to prove that it's not true. But we know that that's not really the reason why Trump is going after South Africa. It primarily has to do with Iran and Hamas and what happened at the what's it called?
The ICC, the international
ICJ. And those issues. Those are the core issues where they went after Israel.
In their infinite wisdom.
In their infinite wisdom, they went after Israel. And I think even the diplomatic relations between Israel and South Africa are extremely strained. I mean, on Twitter, the diplomats themselves have a tiff, which is totally unnecessary from where we're sitting. But I tend to think that, you always have an interesting way of looking at it. Maybe you can give us a perspective on why South Africa got engaged in the Middle East issue and this tiff that they have now with Israel and with America. Is it worth it?
Well, I think I would want to comment more about how South Africa has responded, and maybe try to see if they can find some lessons from how Saudi Arabia reacted when there was that issue of an American who was, was assassinated. Maybe the choice will be between, giving in or maybe standing your ground. And I think the Saudis stood their ground, and I'm sure the South Africans are also standing their ground. But what's different is the
Saudis have $1 trillion.
The Saudis have got something to give. They can put their thumb on the scale, and something meaningful will come out of it. South Africa, unfortunately, they are not in that kind of space. So I think that's where now they in terms of their diplomacy or how they play the geopolitical games, they need to be careful that they cannot, as long as you are you really are a very small guy in that whole game. There are things that you can and things that you cannot do, and I think that's why we can't make any promises to the U.S. Of maybe investments. If anything, when South Africa is going to the U.S., they are looking for investors into South Africa. Yeah, so our situations are different, and unfortunately, that will continue to inform our interactions as Africans with the rest of the world until we have created so much value that the outside world would need something from us.
Okay, so again, when you look at Saudi, so those are very good points that you've raised. And they stood their ground, but tons of human rights violations in Saudi. But what was very interesting in the state dinner that was held at the White House was how it was fraternized and patronized by, your tech bros, business came to that state dinner and they had interactions with the crown prince. What's your perspective? What's your view on what's actually happening beyond Trump? Because one could argue, oh, Trump is the one who is transactional. Okay, that's politics. But all these tech bros, all these CEOs, they were at the state dinner. They wanted to interact with the Saudis. What is that telling us about where the world is going, and how it's evolving, especially when you consider, democracy and those issues around democracy and business in democratic dispensation? Is this the post-democracy world and business world that we are now getting ourselves involved in?
Well, I don't know. I don't know why we have got this obsession with democracy. I think that's a big problem for the Africans. I think the way the world deals with, like the Americans deal with the outside world, is if you define a way of governance or your political system, they will respect you for it. So the Saudis have never, lied to anyone that they are democratic. It's a kingdom, it's a monarchy or whatever structure.
Yeah,
they
it's
have.
a monarchy.
Yeah, and they've got a way of life which you can either take it or leave it, and they've been consistent in that way of life to a point that even not just that, there is actually a massive movement of people from the Western world into Middle East, whether it's Dubai or it's even cities like Riyadh and in Qatar.
Yeah, Cristiano was actually at the dinner. He's now based in Saudi Arabia.
So
Yeah.
it just tells you that democracy is not an attraction. It's really about places where value can be created, where you can do something and thrive. So if you know that you can go into Saudi Arabia, the rules are very clear of things that you can and cannot do. But as long as you are ticking the boxes, you are able to thrive as a business person, like in the case of Cristiano Ronaldo as a sports person. And there's so many sports people that are coming into that country, regardless of what the Sharia law or on their part. Obviously, the Saudis have been trying to sort of relax.
They're moving. They are reforming.
Yeah, they're reforming,
But at a very slow pace.
Yeah,
And women now can drive.
Yeah, they can go to the cinema as well.
So I think our biggest problem, especially in Africa, is we bought into this idea of democracy, which we are very bad at, by the way. Like,
take Tanzania, for example.
Yeah, just go on the map Africa as a continent, any country. They should forget about democracy. They should have a system of government that works for them and stay consistent to it, and then do business with the world.
So if it was up to
in
you,
that context,
you'd go back to the tribal culture, Kumusha.
I don't know, but democracy has not worked, and it will not work for Africans.
Okay, that's a big topic.
Yes.
And we'll probably
We're in danger of getting into a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I think the lesson from...
Before you come in, because I want to contextualize, because then there's a lot that Zia has said, which some of it is very fundamental, especially with what America's perspective. And, in 1 month, we've seen Syria, we've seen
Saudi Arabia, yep.
In the Oval Office. Given that context, let's really go down that rabbit hole. What's your view? What's your perspective? What's actually happening in America? Because now this is now beyond, because the state dinner, none of those CEOs, no one held a gun to their heads and said you must attend. There were lots that didn't attend, but there were lots that actually attended.
Yeah.
And those that matter.
Yeah, even Elon was there, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So can you please help us to just contextualize what's actually happening, because that will actually help us to realize what's actually happening in the world.
So I think there are two things. So I think U.S. foreign policy is much more is less ideological. It's much more pragmatic, and it's business friendly. And in being more pragmatic and in being less ideological, it's also less sanctimonious. So they're not given to lecturing other countries, whether it's Syria or the Saudis, to be more like the US, in terms of the way they organize their societies, whether it's democracy or religion or culture. They say, you know what? You guys have your culture, you have your way of organizing your government and society. Saudi is a monarchy, and that's okay.
And
Right.
that's a fundamental contrast to Obama and how America and Americans, invaded Gaddafi. I mean,
Yeah.
Gaddafi must be turning in his grave.
Yeah. So I think they're much more, and I think the lesson there from a Zimbabwean perspective is because I think, certainly over the last, 30 years or at least 25 years in which a lot of Zimbabwean politicians and companies were under US sanctions on the basis of, these issues to do with democracy and human rights. The world has changed. I think the Trump administration doesn't care about those issues as much as previous administrations, and I think there's a window of opportunity for Zimbabwe as a country to transact with the US, to do deals, to firstly have the existing sanctions set aside completely, as we saw happen with Syria. The US-Syrian sanctions were set aside for 180 days. So I think that the opportunity for us as Zimbabwe is to have a conversation with the Americans where we see our sanctions set aside or removed completely, and we have a conversation about how we can do business with the Americans. We've done well with the Chinese. We've seen them invest in Manise, the steel plant that's doing very well. It's taking market share in South Africa. Last week we were talking about Dangote, who's signed $1 billion worth of transactions. He's looking to invest in fertilizer and cement. The Americans have got hundreds of times the capacity of Dangote. They could make investments of.
But would you make the same arguments as far as Venezuela is concerned? Because Venezuela has offered all their minerals to the Americans, but they have really stuck to their guns as far as democracy and as far as freedom is concerned, as far as Venezuela is concerned. So you almost feel like Syria and Saudi get a pass, but Maduro doesn't.
So I think that the Venezuelans are guilty of another sin beyond these issues to do with democracy, which is that they nationalized their oil industry. And their oil industry, most of the participants were the big American oil majors, right? So I think that, I hate to sound cynical, but I don't think the issues they have with the Venezuelans are primarily to do with democracy and human rights. I think it's business. I think it's to do with
just picking up on the particular stream of consciousness that Rufaro was on. I want you to realize that it's a two-way thing, right? So Americans, certainly we can see that there's a change between Obama and the Trump doctrine. We can certainly see that. And this is now even embedding itself in the culture of America. But the question is, how permanent is this? Is this just the Trump doctrine? And if the Republicans lose in 2028, we're more likely to see, a reversion back to the American liberalism, or this is it. This is now the Trump or the American doctrine. Especially given that the Europeans have no say in the game anymore. They are. Europe is sick at the moment. Economically, they are no longer performing. So if you are no longer performing economically, it becomes very difficult for you to have a big push, whether diplomatic or politically, in the global affairs of the world. And you have China, and we know that China is not a democracy. So is this the new world? Is this the new world, or this is just the Trump doctrine, and come 2028, we're likely to see something beyond that?
Well, the way I see it is maybe it was bound to happen at some point, you just spoke about the idea of mean reversion. I think the Americans had moved far much on the right.
On the left.
On the left, not well.
Yeah, wokeism.
Yes,
And,
there's so much on the left, but also even in terms of the way they're viewing their politics vis-a-vis other countries. I think it wasn't really, they're not treating other countries as partners, as equal partners, equal in the sense of just being sovereign nations in their own right, although economically they might be of different sizes. I think theirs was politics of patronizing other countries, and trying to impose on them their values, their ideas, their principles, and things like that. And obviously, I think at some point it was bound to sort of cause a very, very aggressive reaction from the victims, where they would band together and start maybe challenging the U.S. hegemony that was now cutting across all areas, from the economics, the social, the politics. So I think...
so if I get you correctly, you're saying this is beyond Trump. It's just that the pendulum had swings really far to the left.
Far to the left,
So
yeah.
this is just a correction.
It's a correction.
And it's not necessarily true that it will swing to the right, but it will come back to the
it will
center.
find something, it will find stability close to the center. It had to take someone
Like Trump to bring it back.
To bring it back. And I think in private conversations, you'll be surprised by the number of people that may, on first impression, you think they are way on the left. Then you realize that no, they're also not happy with the way the Americans or the Western world was sort of patronizing other systems. And business people, they really don't care much about the system of government that we have. So why they were in that room, it was because they were looking at Saudi as a
potential
funder,
especially with the AI race.
Exactly. They've got a very big pace. So businesses really don't care much about that. I think where maybe if there was to be a lesson for Zimbabwe, when you're saying that, no, maybe we need to talk to the Americans, we're the American ambassador here, and to say, you know what, they're a free market. Even if you talk to them, they won't impose on their companies. So basically what you have to do, we have to do things properly so that we attract these companies
to come here.
Yeah, to come here. Okay. So it's not really about engaging at the diplomatic level. It's also about the things that we do on the ground that should attract.
Let's tackle that on the next segment. What can Zimbabwe actually do, and some of the issues that have been raised? Does actually Zimbabwe want to change? Because I think that's a big question that we need to get into. But let's hear from Omari.
Happy, 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 happy. Happy, 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 happy.
You can also be happy with the Omari Visa card, the best Visa card in town. Get your Omari Visa card today by sending hi on the WhatsApp number 0787 707 707 now. Get the Omari Visa card to shop online, swipe anywhere, and withdraw cash at any ATM in the world today.
Welcome back, and thank you very much. I think we're going down the rabbit hole, but these rabbit hole sessions are always very important because they just allow us to debunk what's actually happening around the world, around the globe. We are in Zimbabwe, but we are actually affected by what's happening globally, and it's important for us to, read the tea leaves and give an opinion. You too can give an opinion, and please share your opinion. The more elaborate, the better, because it just helps us to, brainstorm and do a lot of scenario planning, especially as we're going into 2026 and beyond, to actually think about Trump, for example, the discussions that we're having, whether this is just a Trump doctrine or it's beyond Trump. And I like what Zia has actually intimated, that actually the pendulum had swung, especially out of the Obama years, had really swung far to the left, and Trump is just the means in which it comes back, and it's not going to necessarily swing to the far right. And even if it does swing to the far right, it just gives an impetus for someone else to come so that it comes back to the center. But what came out of the last segment was, what can Zimbabwe do, or what's the response to Zimbabwe? And I want, Ruvaro, I want you to start getting into it, but I want to give you a certain particular context so that we can then have your incisive comments around this. There's an issue that when you look at the Adesina, arrears clearance and debt restructuring, that it has taken 5 years. When you look at almost everything, sanctions have been here, and people will continuously say that we need to change. But nobody has actually flipped that argument and said the powers that be, and when I say the powers that be, I don't necessarily mean politically, but even economic, that maybe there's no incentive for them to change. We know that Zimbabwe has become a very corrupt nation. So if we do have the Adesina processes and we have great relations with the Americans, it means that things will now need to be run properly. We now need to have structures. So having, these disagreements with the Americans, having, outside or surviving outside the Adesina or the Paris Accord conditions allows us to have this murky and underground economy. And there are lots of people who are very powerful who are benefiting from this. And I must hasten to add, beyond just those that are political office, there are people who would rather have this setup than one where things work properly. What's your comment to that? That actually there is a strong sense that there are people who are invested in Zimbabwe not joining the League of Nations.
Yeah, look, I mean,
family of nations.
I understand that argument quite well, I think, and it's always vexed me, because when I think about it, my view tends to be that if you're a corrupt individual in Zimbabwe, whether you're a politician or you're a business person, right? To whatever extent that you're benefiting from corruption, you would do better if Zimbabwe's GDP was 100 billion.
No, you wouldn't.
Or 250 billion.
No,
because
you wouldn't.
To the extent that you are, getting illicit profits or rewards, you would get more in a bigger economy. Okay, that's been my view. I could be wrong, and maybe you're right that growth and a bigger economy would take away some of the advantages that those have.
Not growth or bigger economy, but structures would certainly take away from the murkiness of the bureaucracy around, because then suddenly you have more eyes to the till, and right now they benefit from less eyes to the till.
Yeah, look, I mean, you may be right, but I suspect, my best guess is that, they're big businesses, huge multinationals that invest and operate in murky places like the DRC, like Sudan, that don't operate in Zimbabwe, notwithstanding our phenomenal resource endowment, right? So I don't think it's necessarily the case that for us to attract tens of billions in new investment, we have to become super transparent, and do so much better than what we see in places like DRC. I think that, those transactions can still happen, and our economy can grow to being $200 billion economy and still be quite murky, right? But everybody's better off, right? The poorest people in the country will be better off if we're $200 billion economy.
Worry less about the poor people in the country, because people are actually not worried about the poor people in the country, especially the elite. They're not. They're worried about themselves. And let me put it to you. The way I want to put it to you is the murkiness of an environment creates unnecessary barriers to entry. And we've all studied the theory around barriers to entry. Now, ideally, we think that barriers to entry have to do with regulation, have to do with capital and things like that. But there's also the, shenanigans or chicanery that happens when you are in murky waters, where it could be business as well, who intentionally keep foreigners out for whatever reason, because they know if there's greater competition, then they lose their margins. It's also true that there is a bureaucracy that benefits from less eyes on the till. We can give Kenya, for example. So the EU comes out and he says there's $1 billion missing from Treasury because we've done our audits and there's $1 billion missing from Treasury. What does the Kenyan government do? They have to rectify because you have more eyes on the till. But in Zimbabwe, there are lots of people who benefit from having less eyes on the till. Once in a while, you have a journalist who breaks a story, and typically that journalist is being, it's news coming from, factional fights. It's not somebody who's actually doing something because they want to bring out, it's usually around factional fights. Without those factional fights, there is a whole litany or a barrier to entry driven by bureaucrats as well as politicians who don't want things to work from a structural perspective. Yes, they want a big economy. Yes, they want the country to grow, but they don't necessarily want the World Bank to have an oversight. They don't necessarily want the IMF to be looking into our books and finding gaps or whatever it is, because they don't benefit from that. What's your view? What are your thoughts?
It's being short-sighted for bureaucrats or people in business to be looking at life in a more selfish kind of view. Look, it's human nature that people are selfish, but I think it's also. I think let's just look at they just need to look at countries and places where they've got better systems. I don't think there is any country that says it's 100% free from corruption. I think there's some certain level of corruption that happens. But obviously what's different is like the one that we're discussing here is one that is so elevated that everything else stops. It's as if the whole structure is created for corruption. That's the main business of the day. And I think there's a lot of that in Zimbabwe where sometimes I wonder if there is not a committee that just sits and say, how do we take more? How do we make life harder for people? and so
very cynical.
And so forth. I mean, the consistency actually makes me then have that thinking that no, it can be sheer coincidence, that
That's a bottle of whiskey right there.
yeah, the things
You've taken out your right to speak.
yes.
Yeah.
No, I want to push back. Actually, yeah. I think you know what we've seen last week. We were talking about Dangote, and we saw the comments from the CEO of ArcelorMittal South Africa, talking about how Manize, the Jinsen steel plant over there, was taking market share from the South African market. So look. Do we have a corruption problem? Is it bad? Absolutely, yes. But are we more open for business in the current era in 2025 than we were pre-2017? For sure. So I think I have a more optimistic take. I think that, firstly, I think the default setting of the current administration in Zimbabwe is more business friendly than what we saw pre-2017. I also think that
we still have got all mutual suspended and PPC.
Yes. No. I'm not saying.
But let's not veer off. The argument is they are bureaucrats, they're businesses, and they're politicians whose interests are best served in Zimbabwe not having extra eyes.
For sure, I think that's true for...
And unfortunately, these people are extremely powerful that they will perpetuate this. Because when you look at the Adesina, we had a perfectly good champion. And we're saying that the world has moved from purely governance issues. And we had a champion. Adesina is a champion who would ensure that this thing could have moved very quickly. And if there was no pushback, it would have happened.
No, I hear you, but
Right.
okay.
So
So
we're trying to understand, first of all, why it hasn't happened. Why hasn't Adesina? And there's a theory that the reason why the Adesina process has moved slowly at snail speed is because there are people who are interested, who have vested interest in ensuring that there are no extra eyes.
So, look, I don't think it's about corruption more than it is about ideology and control. I think that if it was purely about money, right? Because corruption fundamentally and primarily is about money, right? It's not about ideology, right? You don't actually care if you're a corrupt individual what the ideology is. You care about dollars and cents, right? And so the argument I make when I apply my mind to the world of corruption is that $10 is better than $1, $100 is better than $10, right? Your motivation is the dollars and cents, right? And you would do better if you're doing bigger deals, right? So if the Dangotes of this world are visiting Zimbabwe and they want to transact, and they're saying, hey, you know what, if you're going to make my paths easier to traverse, right, I'll give you 5%, I'll give you 10%, right? You're going to invite more of them, and you're going to do more deals, right? If you're just motivated,
Maybe
by,
let me simplify the argument and bring it to your level of understanding.
as a sale.
No, actually,
Wow.
as a guy that likes beer holes, is suppose you have
It's economics for the dummies.
no. It's
I feel like shots were fired there, but
I'm actually being practical. I just want to be
Impolite.
practical. I just want to be practical. I want to be practical and bring it back to the basics. Suppose you have a bottle store or you have a nightclub and you have a bevy of bouncers and security guards who, shake you down to get in.
Yes. Yep.
Right? And because you're a great businessman, you decide, you know what, I think I'm going to put a camera. Because actually it's better for me to have a camera and ensure that
My customers
my
don't get
customers
molested on the
don't
way
get
in.
molested unnecessarily. And suppose you had 5 bouncers and 5 security guards, so you had 10 guys, and because you obviously have a very popular nightclub, and your customers were willing to go through that, but there were certain customers that were not willing to go through the molestation, and these are the sort of guys who will spend a whole lot more. So
Yeah.
you decide, you know what, as a great businessman, I want them to patronize my
My establishment,
nightclub.
yeah, for
So
sure.
let me actually install
A camera.
a camera. Let me install all sorts of gadgetry because you're a techie guy, right? And you realize that actually, if you do that, you don't need
The bouncers.
the bouncers and the security guys. So you lay them off, and you're better off. And then after 2 nights, you realize that your cameras have been vandalized. Right? So
That would be shocking.
the argument is, yes, indeed, you're quite correct that everybody is better off on the net effect of having cameras, of having extra eyes on the till. Everybody is better off, even those who are corrupt, because the guy who's corrupt at the bar doesn't really care about what's happening at the door and whether the molestation is happening, because his corruption is about the guys who are inside.
No, for sure. I
Right?
hear you.
So the issue is we have 5 bouncers, 5 security guards, right, that have no business in our establishment. And the reason why they molest people is essentially a shakedown. That is
No, it's a shakedown.
essentially
No, I
why they're
understand.
there.
I understand.
Right? And it's frustrating to you, right? And you can't understand why these people would molest people when it's in their best interest and it's in everybody's
If the club was
best
doing so much better and they could get paid so much more.
exactly.
Yeah.
But it doesn't negate and doesn't take away from the fact that there is a shakedown. Your customers are being molested. And I am arguing that if I come to you as a consultant, right, and you're like, Cha, and can you believe it? I put up this infrastructure and the guys destroyed it. Not only did they destroy it, but they took my monitors and they took the drive.
Look, I love
and then I say
your-
to you, actually, do you realize that you have a barrier to entry, or you have people who have vested interest to ensure that they have jobs.
Yeah. So, sorry, excuse me. So what you're describing, and I love this example, is it's an alignment or incentive problem, right? Because the guy who is shaking down people at the door believes that that is the lowest hanging fruit for them. That's their best access to value, right? So when the patron arrives, you shake that guy down. That's how you access cash, right? Now, if the owner understood what was going on, he would say, "Hey, you know what, guys? Maybe I'm not paying you enough, right?" And one of the reasons why I'm not looking after you so well is because I am not doing so well. So tell you what, if more people come through and spend more, I'm going to take some of that revenue and put it into a pot for you guys to share, right? And so you create a different incentive, right? Where they're less likely to shake down the patron, and they're much more likely to protect the good patrons who are going to come in and spend more money, because they're better off.
But you don't need
so the model changes. The model changes from
for you to have more customers.
Yes.
You don't need these guys. Our nightclub scenario.
I don't know about the nightclub, but you see, the corruption scenario is very difficult if you try to address it piecemeal. Because, if you just look historically, corruption in Zimbabwe, there are things that never used to happen that, people would shun, and, just any hint or accusation, the shame that would just engulf you and, will send you to committing suicide and things like that. Because, at that point, you'd look from bottom all the way up. It was something that the entire society was shunning. But over the years, we've created incentives for corruption. If anything, we have actually elevated it to the point where it's actually the main rewarding industry, if you could put it that way. If you look back especially in the last 5 years, or maybe stretching 10 years, and say, who are the most successful business people in Zimbabwe, and what do they do? And which industry are they? They're mostly bouncers. Yes. they're mostly bouncers. So then when you then start wanting to address it, maybe at the lower level, maybe, you're saying, okay, I want to deal with the guy in the car park because he's the one who is selling maybe space for patrons to whatever. It's actually too late. It won't be that effective. So you'd need, if there's a way to address it all the way, I think starting it from top down, and just make it very known that there are consequences for this kind of behavior. Look at examples of countries like China. What's the penalty for corruption?
Death.
And what's the penalty for corruption in Zimbabwe?
$150, I think.
No, it's not even. You're idolized. You become a hero. You become a mbinga. You become, someone that, the poster boy or the poster girl.
Okay, our time is running out.
So my take is different. Look, I hear you, but I think I would want to borrow from Lee Kuan Yew and his example in Singapore, where he basically professionalized government. He said, look, you know what? I want the best people to be working in this institution, so I'm going to peg remuneration to what, if you're a successful lawyer in private practice, how much would you make in a typical year, right? And so if you're going to come into government and be an attorney general or be a senior lawyer, you should earn as much as the best lawyers in the private sector. If you're running a major corporate as CEO, right, what's your remuneration? If you come into government and you become a minister or a permanent secretary, that's what your remuneration should be, right? So you get the best people, and they don't have an incentive to think about brown envelopes and corruption because they're generously rewarded. And I think that, and I'm not trying to dismiss, what Zia is saying in terms of punishing bad behavior. Like, there should be downside risk for theft and corruption. But I think that that's not, if that's your only strategy, right? It's, and there's no honey in the strategy, I think you're much less likely to succeed. I think what you want to do is you want to get society's best and brightest to feel that they can also do well, working in government, moving the needle, taking the country forward, but earning proper money.
I think theoretically I can agree with you, but I think practically there are certain rigidities, unfortunately, that make it impossible. Again, come back to our nightclub example. Why is it nightclub security? It's not the taekwondo expert. It's a guy who's huge, 7 foot, and he's so big that I don't think he can.
He's
even
intimidating,
throw.
yeah.
But why? Because if you really think about effectiveness, then you'll have, a jiu-jitsu, whatever guy.
Or you get a guy who's an expert with a gun.
Who's an expert with the gun or whatever. That's what you would get. But from time immemorial, you go to any nightclub, what you have is a huge guy.
A
Who
big
can't even breathe.
a big frame is, a big frame instills fear in people's hearts. So even before you know that they're carrying a gun, just seeing them should make you, quake.
Cower.
Yeah, and cower. Yeah.
So there's a point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
That what you may theoretically deem to be effective, unfortunately, practically, it may not be so. And unfortunately, in Zimbabwe, what we've done is we've created a political, economic, and social class that are essentially bouncers and security guards. And when you clean house, they will intentionally pay people to come and cause fracas so that their jobs are
So
secure.
you know the history about I can't pronounce the name of the dynasty, but it's a Chinese dynasty that lasted millennia and did extremely well. It was stable, it was powerful, was economically successful. Do you know? So there was a game-changing event where before this dynasty emerged, there was always turmoil in the ruling court, right? There were coups after coups after coups, right? And anybody who successfully seized power was constantly paranoid that there would be a coup to remove them, right? And so it was just, and the guy who actually introduced stability realized that this is a perpetual problem, and the solution is to get all the protagonists in a room and say, hey, guys, you know what? I'm the guy in charge now. I know how this plays out. Usually what happens is one of you will then, in the next couple of years, stab me in the back and take my seat and then spend the rest of your reign looking over your shoulder, worrying about the other guys in the room. So I want to end this cycle of constant violence and coups. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to promise you guys a big percentage of the kitty, but I'm going to send you far away from the capital where you guys can spend the rest of your lives living in comfort and luxury. And he basically stopped this perpetual cycle of coups in the Chinese dynasty, and he created a lasting dynasty and it succeeded for literally thousands of years. So I think there's always an opportunity to reframe the way the game is played.
I tend to agree with you, but I think we have to correctly diagnose the problem. That the problem are the bouncers. But anyway, let's move on.
You might have some issues with bouncers.
Because our time is running. I have no issues, by the way. They're some of my best friends. But time is running out. But let's talk about South Africa. We saw very positive rating. It's still ungraded, but it's moved to a double B.
Double B minus.
Minus, yeah. And these are
It's one notch below investment grade.
grade, yeah. These are your credit ratings. Would you want to just quickly talk about that because I know we've been bashing South Africa quite a bit. But, I mean, the Minister of Finance and as well as the central bank have done phenomenally well in really curtailing the budget deficit and ensuring that inflation actually comes down. That's the Central Bank of South Africa. They've done phenomenally well, and the Rand has actually responded favorably. But maybe you want to give us a bit of background and your thoughts around that.
Yeah. So it's S&P Global, which come out with new ratings for South Africa, which its foreign currency rating was raised to BB, and its local currency rating was raised to BB plus, and the outlook is positive. And the reason for that optimism is around reforms that South Africa has done with the electricity sector, especially Eskom, and also other state-owned entities, and also the expected growth in the economy, where in 2025 is expected to grow by almost 1.1%, and in terms of fiscal revenue, they're expected to collect more than the budget. So it's positive for South Africa. We know that maybe in the last 10 years they saw the credit rating taking a big knock, and there were also all sorts of problems, and I think most of them were really emanating from the state-owned entities that were struggling, and they were hemorrhaging the fiscus with continued requests for support. And the reforms that they have done, they have sort of turned around some of them. And so it's really positive, and you've spoken already about the sort of stability in the Rand. And
it's actually gained.
Yeah. So it's good. I think in the last 2 years, we're also seeing a very uncomfortable sort of trend of disinvestment, even on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and also the massive movement of millionaires from South Africa. So the top maybe 0.5 or 0.1% choosing to relocate into other safer places. So this is really, it means that, President Cyril Ramaphosa and team have probably done something positive.
Okay.
And we might see other rating agents also coming through.
Yeah, look, I beg to differ.
So let's give
I
you,
think this
and
is-
the context is 1.1. Zia is gashing around 1.1% economic growth. The last time that they grew at 5% was 15 years ago.
Tia's gashing about lipstick on a pig.
Yeah.
The rating agencies, the credit rating agencies, have no credibility. Nobody makes important investment decisions based on what, whether it's S&P or Fitch or who's the other one?
Well, your debt Moody's.
Moody's, right?
But your debt.
These guys, remember, 6-7 years ago, downgraded the U.S. Treasuries, and they didn't have an impact at all on the yield or interest in.
Well, the U.S. is exceptional in that manner, but certainly for developing countries, the interest rate that you start picking up.
So I think the real indication, is what Zia was speaking to, or you, where you're talking about that 0.1%, right? Where are the millionaires going? Right? So Anglo is divested out of South Africa, right? What does that tell you? I think, and to me, that's a very important signal.
That's a very good point, but because we're running out, so sorry to...
Sure.
I think the question is this a directional change? So we know that they have a lot of work to do, but would you say that they've turned in terms of the direction?
So directionally, I think they, and it's actually quite sad because I was incredibly excited about the leadership of Cyril Ramaphosa as a business, as a guy coming out of the business world into public office. I think his performance has been underwhelming. Directionally, I don't think they're addressing the key issues in terms of making that country business friendly, whether it's from labor regulations.
There's still a tax on entrance. I do get you, because BE is a tax on an investor going into South Africa.
So-
And, nowhere else in the world would you get that. I mean,
Like Starlink is not in South Africa because
so let's give
of BE.
Zia the last word. How do you respond to this? Things like BE, which are very costly for the South African government. And yet we do realize and recognize that BE had to start as a political venture. But I think that there's been a study that was done on whether or not South Africans support BE. Very few, actually, less than 20% support BE
because a tiny minority benefited.
a tiny minority benefited, but it's actually a cost to foreign direct investment because what you're essentially saying is everybody who comes in, there's a tax. But I'll give you the last word to just respond to what Rufaro has said.
So obviously, we tried something like that in Zim and it didn't work out well, and we had to change course. And clearly for BE, it has really failed to improve the livelihoods of the intended people. All that it has done is to create a group of oligarchs, people who are feeding off, their access to the ANC leadership. So I think it's how many years now since their independence? Is
1994, you can do the math. So it's
almost
30 years,
30
29 years.
I think the country would need to take a sort of a different path that says, you know what, we pursued economic empowerment maybe as a way or means to try and address historical injustices. And these are the results. And maybe we need to change course and do something differently and start maybe attracting investment. Because at the end of the day, if you're attracting investment, you are increasing the size of your economy, but also you are creating jobs as you do that. And with the problem of youth unemployment in South Africa being probably a source of this, partly of this xenophobia that we see, it just tells you where the effort has to be on South Africa, but it doesn't take away from the good work that they've tried to do, reforming some of their state-owned entities. Just 2 years ago, they had serious power issues like us here, and how they managed to do that is really something that we can.
No, but it wasn't the state that solved the power issues. Basically, because South Africa has a functional credit market, it's easy for corporates with cash flow to fund.
No, it was the state,
solar.
ESCOM. No,
Yes,
it wasn't.
ESCOM.
It was they
ESCOM.
started firing their coal mine, their coal thermal power
Yes,
stations.
they did some reforms
And
there,
that's
but
ESCOM.
the private sector basically also made a plan.
It's
Well, primarily because ESCOM is the largest producer, and I think that they've increased production by like 50%. And primarily it's coming from, they just rehabilitated their thermal
coal
stations,
plants, yeah.
and they just started firing because they stopped listening to Germany and the Europeans. And coming back to our issues of the pendulum having swung really to the far left.
Yeah, Bill Gates even changed his views on climate change,
So
which is remarkable.
Yeah, and we saw Dangote actually coming.
saying no,
Zambia,
forget about renewable energy. You have got the core reserves. Utilize
Exploit them.
Gentlemen, the minute you say that, YouTube is going to flag us, and yeah. Anyway,
Well, YouTube is
on
much
that
less
note-
woke than it used to be.
yeah.
You'll be surprised.
On that note, thank you very much. As you can see, these are our rabbit hole sessions, and essentially it's us just picking each other's brains, and nobody has the correct answer, and nobody actually knows what's going to happen. But it's just sharing opinions, and please do like, share. And share your opinions. Be as elaborate as possible because it actually helps us in our scenario planning. Otherwise, have yourself a wonderful weekend. We certainly will. Cheers.